Okay, we good? Great. Okay, welcome everyone to the fifth of our artist talks this year. These are the annual artist talks hosted by the University of Worcester Fine Art Department and Meadow Arts. We have 3 people, quite a record for Meadow Arts tonight, which is great. Just a little bit of, I'm going to do a bit of housekeeping. I'll be chairing this. For those of you who don't know, I'm John Cousins. I'm the course leader for Fine Art and Fine Art with Psychology at the University of Worcester. And as I say, I'll be chairing this. The event's been filmed, so if anybody doesn't want to have their image on camera, let us know or speak to somebody, me or somebody. Yeah, I think that's good. Okay, yeah, we have 3 talks coming up, which are linked to the exhibition Watermark, Meadow Arts exhibition Watermark, which is running from now till June. And the first of these is Hilary Jack, who Anne will be introducing in a little while. The following talks will be by Emma Critchley on Feb 21st and by Daniel Pride-Jarman on March 14th, followed by a climate roundtable event on April 18th. So everybody's welcome to those. For those of you online, hello everybody online. I need to explain a little bit how it works for online audiences. So those of you online will notice that you can't turn on your microphone or camera and that the chat function is disabled. But if you have any questions, you put them in the Q&A part if you have the questions. And at the end of the session, I think either Tegan or Rose will be taking those questions. So if you put your questions there and they won't be shown to anybody else, we get a lot of questions. Or if we get a lot of questions, we may not get round to everybody's question, but hopefully we'll be able to do so. So at the end of the session, we'll be taking questions from the floor, and we'll also be taking questions from online. For those of you online too, if you should see a show captions icon in the menu bar. If you turn this on, you'll see closed captions as we talk. These captions are automatically generated, however, so please understand that it may not always be accurate. So I think that's everything. And maybe we'll have a short break for after the talk and then for people just to and then we'll open up to questions. So great. So welcome Anne, who will be introducing Hilary Jack. Thank you very much.
Hi, hello. Thanks a lot, John. Hello, everybody. As John was saying, this is the first in the second part of this year's lecture series, and these are going to be 4 Watermark events. So we do kick off with Hilary Jack, who's come along to share a little bit about her work and how she got to work on a scale of what we can see outside the hive here, because Hilary was, we commissioned Hilary to be the main event at Watermark, and it's an outdoor work, which Hilary does quite a lot of. That's why we thought of her, and it kind of encompasses a lot of the issues that are approached in Watermark. And Watermark, of course, is about looking at water and flooding as environmental markers of climate change. So Hilary's work is quite extraordinary outside here at the Hive, and I'm sure you'll talk about it a little bit, but I just wanted to say in introducing you how impressed I was by how quickly and ambitiously you responded as we asked you to do this, and it was quite an extraordinarily quick, because it has to be said that you had very little time to respond to this commission, as another artist had actually pulled out for health reasons. So that's, it says a lot about your practice, and I'm just going to introduce you as you introduce yourself. So Hilary works across media in research-based projects, site-referential artworks, sculptural installation, and intervention. Her works has an activist element, which comments on the politics of place, socio-political ADN, environment, and environmental issues. So these are all terms I'm sure you'll explain a bit better. But so Hilary also uses found objects very much within her practice, and they often trigger new work exploring recurring environmental themes. So Hilary's exhibited across the UK and internationally, and is currently, there's a big work on display at the Custard Factory, which I'm sure you'll show. And also you are in, Hilary's in quite a few different collections, including big works in sculpture parks in the US. I just want to also mention that you are the founder of Paradise Works, which I'm sure you will talk about. So just wanting to thank you so much for the work and for tonight. And I also want to mention that you work with Nat Pitt, who a lot of you will know of tonight, but you are one of his artists in Division of Labour. So yeah, looking forward to hearing you. Thanks.
Hi everybody, thank you so much Anne for that very generous introduction, and thank you for commissioning me to do this piece of work. I was really excited when that came up. It's been a really tough time for artists and, well, lots of people through the pandemic. A lot of artists lost huge amounts of work. So yeah, it was great to be able to get back into my work again in this way and make a new piece of work, commissioned piece of work. So it's fantastic. I'm really pleased to be part of Watermark, and thank you all for coming. Hello everybody online. So yeah, I'm based in Manchester actually, and as Anne said, this is I'm co-founder of Paradise Works, this building here, which is 3 floors in this not so pretty as the Hive building, and not so environmentally friendly either, building in Salford, just on the Salford-Manchester border. And I set up Paradise Works in 2017 because lots of artists were being kicked out of their studios in Manchester. There's an amazing amount of building work, for anyone who's been to Manchester will know. And many artists were finding themselves studio homeless. So I've been director of this space for the last 5.5 years, and I'm just about to step down and hand over to somebody else to take the reins of Paradise Works. So there's an advert out at the moment for that job. And at Paradise Works, we do loads of events. This is our sort of welcome area at Paradise Works, a bar area, and we have a fantastic gallery space at Paradise Works, where we've shown many regional artists and also artists from beyond Manchester and Salford, and international artists too. And we are kind of open to some submissions. We're in between funding at the moment, but yeah, we do also work with guest curators, so that's also an interesting option. But you can see many of the shows that we've had on our website if you're interested to have a look. I'm not able to kind of go into too much detail today because I've got a lot to talk about, but do have a look on our website. And I've also been involved in a number of artist-led projects. One was Apartments, just after I graduated from the MA at Manchester. And this building here, you can see, is a council tower block in Manchester by the Mancunian Way. And my friend Paul Harfleet, who's also an artist you may have heard of, he has a project called the Pansy Project, and Birds Can Fly. And we ran this space together in his flat on the 6th floor of a council tower block. And for 5 years we showed about 300 artists in an artist in residence programme, and also just in a sort of exhibition capacity. And this is his space here. So we showed the artworks alongside Paul's everyday possessions. It created some really interesting discussions about art and what is not art. And we did that for about 5 years. And there's some artwork here is that little nest of tables there by Maeve Rendell, and then a photograph on the wall by Rachel Tweddle, a London-based artist. Many of the artists that we showed came from our network. I'd been on a residency in Hungary, and we wanted to show those artists in Manchester and broaden our networks, and it was a really good way of doing that. So, you know, you don't need a white cube gallery to do this kind of thing. We did it on a shoestring, and we funded every show out of the contents of a very large jam jar that we had in the kitchen, which people put donations into for drinks. So it was a bit of a party atmosphere at the time. But today I've been asked to talk to you mainly about my practice as an artist, and to really show how my work has started from very humble beginnings. Some very small scale artworks that were made on a very DIY level in my studio, and how my career's developed over the years, to more large scale work with sort of elements of risk and budgets and planning permissions and all kinds of permissions that are required to make larger scale outdoor work. And I want to be as transparent as possible about how opportunities have come my way, because there's nothing more disheartening, I think, as a student particularly, or a young artist, that when you go to a talk from an artist and they say that, you know, they had this amazing trajectory from graduation degree show through to representing their country at the Venice Biennale or being represented by a blue chip gallery. And I can tell you that that is generally not the case for artists. Being an artist is a very precarious career, but it is possible. I'm still finding out how to negotiate the art world, which I don't know if any of you have read Jerry Saltz's How to Be an Artist, but in that book he says it is a snake pit. So definitely do be careful out there. But onto my work. So as Anne said, my work is research-based, and it spans all media and focuses on socio-political and environmental aspects of our daily lives. My work, more often than not, has a site-specific element to it, and by that I mean some kind of interrelationship with the site in which it sits or occupies. I've exhibited in galleries, heritage art spaces, private and public spaces across the UK and internationally. My work is, as Anne said, in a number of private and public collections. I should also say that there is an activist element to my practice as an artist, and as well as being an artist, I'm also involved in a number of environmental activist groups such as Ecocide Network, Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil. And I see my practice as going hand in hand really with that sort of environmental activism that I've done since, you know, forever really. And I feel it's more important now that we really have, you know, allow our voices to be heard. So if any of you are interested in activism, then please go and join a group. The time is now to do it. There's a very, I think, a quite active group of Extinction Rebellion in Worcester, and I'm sure there are other networks too that you can join. It's really important that we are more powerful than we think we are. But I'm going back to the early sort of 2000s with this work, which involves found objects that are found on city streets. And this was sort of work I was making after I'd completed my MA. I was interested in the concept of built-in obsolescence, the idea that an object is built to break or fail after a certain period of time. which then locks you very neatly into buying the same object over and over again. Mobile phones are a very good example of that, but the humble umbrella, which appears on city streets all over the world after rainfall, when having been bought from a pound shop has been, in an urgent situation, suddenly breaks, and then they get dumped on the street or stuffed inefficiently into bins. And I was collecting broken umbrellas from city streets and then taking them back to my studio and repairing them and then replacing them on the street for someone else to pick up and use. So it might seem like a rather futile act or quite an absurd act, but I think there is a sort of sense of humour there, but also it seemed to me that the world was kind of working the wrong way round at this time. Recycling was a kind of relatively new thing that city councils were, policies were coming out of recycling and all these complicated recycling issues. But it seemed to me we should be repairing things or using less things rather than just chucking things away when they break. And over time, we've learned that recycling is the problem. We just tend to ship off our recycling to other countries to sort out, who are poorer than ourselves. And we also know now that repairing things is quite cool, and people are waking up to that and wearing second-hand clothes and also watching the repair shop quite avidly on television. So I was also not just working with umbrellas, but collecting other objects from city streets. This tennis racket I found in London on the street, and it looked like someone had punched a hole in it or the ball had gone right through it. And it's obviously a very old tennis racket, a kind of wooden tennis racket. And at one time you would have been able to have had that repaired in a sports shop. But obviously this was a discarded object just left out for, rubbish. But I repaired that using 1980s pin and thread craft technique, which you might remember your grandparents or great-grandparents, depending on your age, doing this or having one of these things on the wall in their house. And this project sort of developed into a much larger project called Make, Do and Mend, where I repaired a lot of objects collected from the streets. And I also worked with found postcards, where I sort of collaged them together to make kind of everlasting landscapes, like this piece here. And this body of work slowly grew into a body of work, and I was invited into a number of group shows in London. This was in London at Three Colts Gallery, and I showed some of my repaired umbrellas and lots of photographs. And at Axel Lapp Projects in Berlin, where I knitted a second glove to a lost glove that I'd found on at the side of the Berlin Wall. I can't knit very well, and the glove was a very peculiar shape, but nevertheless, it had the old single glove had found itself a partner. So, and also this project. I was invited to go to New York and take part in an exhibition called Conflux 06, which was really exciting. I haven't got any images, I'm afraid, of that. I've lost those in a catastrophic laptop situation. But that was a very exciting thing. And all of these exhibitions, group shows, were building into really building up my practice and also getting to know many, many more artists who I could then work with. I was also interested in the ubiquitous plastic carrier bag in a tree, and I'd noticed one of these bags not far from my studio in Manchester, which seemed to have been there forever in this tree, sort of quite stark and standing out against the kind of red-bricked Manchester vernacular. And seemed to me these objects were really a symbol of our wasteful society, given away free at the time at tills, and then discarded after a single use or escaping their fate in landfill to be snagged in the branches of a tree like this one. And some of them, I started collecting more and more of these images and people also who I'd come into contact with over the last few years, these early years, had started sending me images too. And I built a website to house these images called Turquoise Bag in a Tree. Some of the images look sort of really vibrant and full of life, and others look kind of limp and sad, dangling in a tree, forever sort of trapped. And as I say, this built into kind of a large archive of work, photographs that I'd taken and also photographs that other people had taken. And eventually in 2020, this archive was shown at Hartford University in a group show called Plastic Matters, which explored the good and bad side of plastic. And this project expanded into, over the years, into intervention in the streets, like this piece, a sign highlighting the fact that the bag is there, and also this kind of work here. Oh, now I don't know how to play that, but anyway, it doesn't matter. This is a little short video. I'm using someone else's laptop, so I'm not able to drive it very well, but this is obviously a discarded tree trunk, and then with a fan on the top. So the tree trunk is a metaphor for the tree, and then the fan is the wind, and it blows this bag sort of back and forth in a rather sort of poetic fashion. I'd also, in 2016, so moving forward, I was invited to have a solo show, and this piece of work is called Turquoise Bag in a Tree, but it's a dead tree with a bag sort of appearing to be snagged in its branches. And I don't know if you can see, but the actual tree trunk is suspended from the ceiling of the gallery. So every time the doors of the gallery opened, it sort of swayed rather gently in a breeze. And people sort of started to realise that actually the bag was not a plastic carrier bag. This was something solid, and this was actually a cast of a plastic carrier bag in bronze. So this very difficult thing to do, cast a bag in bronze, because there's, you know, nothing there really to cast. So you have to make a thing to kind of make it solid, and then you can make a mould and make the bronze cast. But yeah, so it had this sort of trompe-l'oeil effect, that people would have this light bulb moment when they went into the gallery and stood under the bag, like these people. Rather nerve-wracking to see that happening, because the bag weighed 12 kilograms. So you're very reliant on some good art technicians there to assure you that it's being attached to the ceiling properly. And this is Rosemary Shirley on the right here, Dr. Rosemary Shirley, and Verity Elson. Verity was then the curator at Compton Verney Gallery, who, Compton Verney's not far from here, I'm sure you know it. And Rosemary was working with Verity on an exhibition that she was preparing for and doing the research for, called Creating the Countryside, which was an exhibition, a sort of, they called it a blockbuster exhibition, and it really was an amazing exhibition. I think there was 300 artists in it, from artists, heritage, historic artists like Constable, Turner, and then more contemporary artists, well-known contemporary artists like Matt Collishaw, Grayson Perry, and then artists like myself, who were less high profile, but it was a great opportunity to show at Compton Verney. And what I should have said actually is that the bag, I cast the bag in bronze because I wanted the bag to have a sort of a relationship to longevity, and also I wanted it to have this kind of monetary value. During this exhibition, the plastic carrier bag tax came into force. So actually people were then forced to pay for the bags rather than just throw, or, you know, they can still throw them away, but obviously it was a deterrent. And blue bags actually weren't part of that tax for some reason, because they're usually the ones that are given away at markets or the lower end of the scale of shops, not shops like Tesco with a logo on and things like that. And I wanted to use bronze because bronze also has a memorial aspect to it, in the sense that often memorial sculpture, public realm sculpture is used, made from bronze. So to me, this was like a sort of ultimate memorial to our ability to despoil our planet. And indeed, Rosemary recommissioned this piece of work for creating the countryside at Compton Verney, and it became the centrepiece in one of the rooms alongside some really fantastic artists at creating the countryside. And here it is again, more recently, I think this was 2019 at Castlefield Gallery, in a show that was curated by one of the fellows of the Henry Moore Institute. So while I was actually making this sort of work as well, the smaller scale work, I'd had a show at Castlefield Gallery, and two curators came along to the show, Jordan Kaplan and Daniel Arnaud. And they liked the show, and they asked me if I'd like to put in a proposal to make a more ambitious piece of work for the Tatton Biennial. And the Tatton Biennial was a really great show that used to happen every 2 years, obviously. And it was a great platform for artists, both at a more high profile than myself, and also for younger artists like myself. So I wrote a proposal for them, and I really didn't think I would be successful, because what I proposed was to make this giant bird's nest in a tree that people could climb into up a spiral staircase. The theme for the show was Flights of Fancy. And Tatton Hall is an amazing, huge, stately home, and it had been left to the National Trust by the last inhabitant of Tatton Hall because he died childless without an heir. So this idea of an empty nest, a giant empty nest, came to mind. And so that's what I proposed to build, and indeed, it happened. But this was the first sort of large-scale thing I'd ever made. I'd not worked with a team before, and I had to work with a team at this point because obviously I needed technical skills I didn't have myself. The nest actually needed planning permission. And inside that structure, which looks very organic, there is a kind of properly engineered kind of platform with loads of coaching bolts and big chunky bits of wood and a proper platform. And I worked with an engineer who'd worked with some of the artists who were at the Tatton Biennial to achieve that safely, because obviously there were loads of safety issues and access issues. But really, that was the first thing I'd ever made. It was absolutely a white-knuckle ride, but we got it done, and I learnt a huge amount from it. It was a sort of baptism of fire, really. And as a result of that, obviously, the Tatton Biennial was a really great platform, as I said. So many curators would come from other galleries and institutions to look at the show. It was on for quite a long time, probably 10 months or something. And as a result of that, I was invited to make some more large-scale works for National Trust properties. This was at Packwood House, which again, totally by chance, not too far from here either. And this was like a sort of a little magical kind of cottage in the bluebell wood there. And again, this posed quite a lot of issues building it, not mainly because of the bluebells, because bluebells are protected and we weren't actually allowed to step on them or anything. So we had to kind of build a platform to actually build the thing. But anyway, and also lots of technical drawings. I thought I'd just show you these drawings just to show you that, you know, these things don't just happen organically. You know, you have to have these sort of technical drawings, so to show to people, because what's in your head doesn't necessarily translate into someone else's head as you're seeing it. So I had to build a little funny kind of maquette to begin with to give the sort of impression, and then this was the architect, a friend of mine who did the architect's drawings for this, with all the measurements and everything else that was necessary to get it through. And I built this because Packwood, the commission really was about Packwood follies. They were follies that had been at Packwood House, which had been destroyed over time. And it was kind of referencing the history of the house, how the house had been built, how it had been changed over time. And again, the last inhabitant had had a massive sort of impact on the way the house looked. And he tried to turn back time in terms of dressing the house. So he'd made it look like a Tudor mansion, when in fact it was actually, if any of you have been to Packwood House, I mean, it's a very, very magical place. But it looks like it's really old, but actually it's just had loads of stuff bolted onto it to make it look really old, so that this would raise the status of the then owner of the property. It was much more, you know, sort of impressive to have a really old house. So this use of kind of reproduction Tudor furniture to clad the outside of this little cottage was referencing that aspect within the brief. And I sort of also, at this time, a lot of people were talking, when they were talking about my work, they'd sort of reference it as sort of things like little huts or sheds or homesteaders kind of cottages, or also talking about doomsday prepping and sort of end of days kind of things that people do when they're, you know, having some kind of thinking about an environmental catastrophe and how they would manage in the world. So in America, you know, there's huge communities of people who are kind of prepping for the end of days or some sort of catastrophic event where they would have to flee the city out to live in, you know, some sort of little doomsday preppers cottage or something. And so this was sort of on my mind, and I kind of went down a sort of rabbit hole of research and also looking at, you know, multimillionaires, bunkers underground and things like this. But I was also preparing at this time for a show called The Late Great Planet Earth in Manchester. And that sort of idea of this sort of apocalyptic, something terrible happening in the future was very much in people's minds at the time, as it is now. And so I decided I would build this sort of doomsday, this end of days log cabin. I think the curator was a bit shocked when he saw the scale of it. I think he thought it was going to be about the size of a playhouse, and that's his office door there. So he sort of came out one day and saw it and was like, oh my God, it's enormous. But anyway, it's inside. It had the sort of a soundtrack, which was like the sound of the end of the world or the beginning of the new world. And it also had a big red moon inside, because what I realised was that while the show was actually on, there was this kind of weird celestial occurrence where the moon and the sun were eclipsing each other. People, I don't know if some of you might remember, they were making like pinhole cameras to look at the sun. I think it was the moon passing over the sun. And that fed into a biblical prophecy called the blood moon prophecy, where in Revelations, and the moon turns to blood and the sun turns black as sackcloth of hair. So very dramatic sort of prophecy where people really believed the end of days were coming. And that was actually during this exhibition, September the 23rd or something. So I was thinking, you know, we could all go and hide in this doomsday preppers log cabin. I think, you know, as an artist, you never really know who is watching your practice or looking at your work. And, you know, sometimes it seems like nothing is happening, in you, you know, and then sometimes two things come along at once or whatever. But, yeah, one day after sort of thinking that really I should, you know, be trying to contact people at Yorkshire Sculpture Park, because, you know, I felt that some of my work would sit quite well there. But having had no success, I sort of out of the blue got an email from Sarah Coulson, who is senior curator at Yorkshire Sculpture Park. And she said to me she'd like to come and do a studio visit. And what happened was she was doing an independent project up at this huge stately home in Scotland called Mellistane House. It's on the border of Scotland and England. And the family who actually live in this house are, you know, the real deal. They go way back to the original family who built this house in their sort of lineage, Lord and Lady Haddington. And so I went up to Mellistane House to do some research, and you know, I was just kind of blown away by the house itself, which is just amazing inside. It's really beautifully kept, and one of a very few examples of a Robert Adam interior and exterior, which is in, you know, really good condition. And so the house itself is just full of these incredible plaster mouldings, like ceiling roses. That's obviously, you know, not one of Robert Adam's, but this is. I've had to grab these off the internet, so apologies for the quality of the images, but they would have like a huge chandelier hanging from them. This is the library at Mellistane House. And so I was just interested in these things and how, you know, amazing they were. And what I discovered while I was there was that the Lord Haddington had recently died. So when I met the family, they were actually grieving. He'd been, you know, living in this house. He was born in this house, and he'd lived there for, you know, all his life. And he was a real character, this guy. He was interested in the paranormal, and he'd had many, many conversations with ghosts and all kinds of stories surrounding him about sort of paranormal activity in the house. But one of his main hobbies, like many sort of members of the aristocracy, he had a lot of very peculiar hobbies, but he would travel the world looking for crop circles and photographing them, and then putting them in magazines, and, you know, he was very well known for that. And it seemed to me that he'd been living in this house, which was full of kind of similar shaped things. You know, some of the crop circles that you see, you know, online or whatever, are very similar to these shapes. So I decided that I would try and make a crop circle at Mellistane House. He'd always wished in his lifetime that a crop circle would appear. I mean, the family owned a huge swathe of land along the border of Scotland and England, and he'd always wanted a crop circle. So when I came up with the idea, they were like, this would be great. So I had this, I made a crop circle. It's not really a crop circle, it's a drawing of a crop circle. So it's a template of one of the ceiling roses in the house, the plaster mouldings, the circular plaster mouldings. And this is obviously a drone shot from above on down onto the formal garden at Mellistane House. And it's drawn with turf paint. So I imagined I'd be able to do this by hand. I don't know what I was thinking of, but obviously I started to think about it, and I was thinking this is a massive task. It's 25 metres across, 75 metres across. And I was like, you know, need to speak to somebody about this. So I spoke to a couple of engineers, and they said, well, you know, what you need is a massive template, but you'll have to, it's too heavy, all these sort of different ideas coming forward. So we made a sort of a triangular piece, like a slice of cake, which we staked into the ground, and then we moved it around and painted on turf paint for the crop circle shape. That's an image from much further above, and the family felt that I mean, it's a very ephemeral kind of thing, sort of slightly ethereal, I mean, I think, not ephemeral. And they sort of felt like this was John Bailey, their husband, and their father, kind of looking down on them from above. So I called it In Memoriam. So it was like a memorial to him. And this is the young Earl who'd inherited this whole estate. And this was a photograph that was in the Times. It's the only time I've ever had any press in the main pages of any national newspaper. And I had two big pictures. This one was this picture, and it had the headline, "Lords are leaping." So, yeah, and George was an absolutely brilliant guy. He was lovely. When I met him, I thought he was the gardener. You know, he kind of was very humble, but, you know, he was the real deal in terms of aristocracy. The second piece I made there was No Borders, which has become quite a piece of work for me. And this is a neon sign. It's 8 by 9 metres. No borders, just horizons, only freedom. And the quotation is not mine. It's a quotation from Amelia Earhart, the female aviator, a feminist icon and adventurer. And the placement of this was really crucial. So it's right on the border here of their land. The lake actually is the edge of and those trees, that's the edge of Mellostane House, and beyond that is England. So it's exactly on the English Scottish border. And that land was very contested land. So, you know, over centuries, there would be fighting along this border with the border reivers trying to do a land grab or take, you know, cattle and sheep and possessions from Mellostane House. So it seemed to me an appropriate place for that to go. And it also fed into the politics of Scotland at that time, over the sort of referendum vote in Scotland, and also the Brexit, the referendum in England. So yes, it was there until October, I think, was it 2017 or 2018? And then very, very luckily, at the very last minute, it went to Yorkshire Sculpture Park, and it was at Yorkshire Sculpture Park for 4.5 years in the formal garden. It's in storage now, and I'm hoping to find a new home for it very soon. So it's been shortlisted for something at the moment, so I really hope it's going to be go somewhere else. And at Yorkshire Sculpture Park, it was seen very much more as a sort of political sort of placard, really, like a sort of a protest placard, particularly to do with Brexit. And I had loads of stuff on Instagram and comments, and mainly supportive, very little kind of trolling. And also it was seen as kind of related to Trump's wall, which at the time, you know, he was the president, and he was saying that he was going to build this massive wall, which he, you know, started to do. So it was, yeah, to do with that as well. And an American couple visited Yorkshire Sculpture Park who were very serious collectors. And oh, I forgot about this. Yeah, it's got its own merchandise. So, yeah, and I was very pleased to sell one of these at my open studio. And then I think the next day I got this email. So they cost about 20 quid. And I was like, oh, great, I've sold a couple of bags at Open Studio. And then the next day I had an email from this American couple, from their director of acquisitions, asking if they could actually buy No Borders, which just blew my mind, really. I was like, well, how am I going to do this? So with the help of Nat, we sold a new edition, an American, a USA edition of No Borders to this American couple who have their own sculpture park. This is it. It's crazy. Yeah, so it's, yeah, there's one in America now. So, and I think, yeah, it's just amazing to think of it there. I've never been able to go because it was sold in 2019, and obviously the sale had just gone through, and then 2020 started to be murmurings about this pandemic, and I was in negotiation with the people who were making it, who were in a factory in New York, light bright neon. And they started to say, well, you know, we don't know what's going to happen here. It's pretty bad. Anyway, they locked themselves into their factory, their warehouse, and lived in their factory for several weeks while they made sure that all the commissions that they were working on were completed. And this was installed in 2020 in July, dead on time. So they were absolutely amazing. It was incredible. And I never got to see it so far. So maybe one day. And then a second UK edition is now on the custard factory in Birmingham. And this is just a mock-up, actually. It's not an image. We sent the mock-up to show them what it would look like. And then it was finally installed, and it was a white knuckle ride installing that on top of the custard factory. The Neon Workshops had measured everything to make sure they could get everything into the building and through the doors and everything. And when we got there, there'd been some work done on one of the doors, and they'd changed the diameter of the door, and so we couldn't get the framework through the door, so we had to winch it up the side of the building. So all the health and safety regulations went out the window, but fortunately none of it went into a window. So these photographs, I think these are Tegan's photographs, actually. I think you took these wherever you are, Tegan. Yeah. So yeah, very hard to photograph, but yeah, if you're in Birmingham, have a look and check it out. And then I'm just about coming to Watermark, so it's 10 to 5, so not too bad. 10 to 6, I mean. So yeah, I got this call from Anne saying, would you want to come down and have a look at Worcester, look at this building in Worcester at the Hive, this funny sort of little tower island. So yeah, I came down one day and we sort of brainstormed about what we could do, and obviously I'd known that Worcester was incredibly vulnerable to flooding because of the River Severn, because I'd been down a few times and seen it totally flooded and unable to get into the city centre. And so yeah, we started to think about what we could do on Story Island, and I was sort of really interested in this kind of moat idea, the way that the water just sort of flowed around this area. And initially I was thinking, oh, it'd be great, you know, to build some kind of boat or, you know, an ark or something that would rise up. So this idea of sort of Noah's Ark, and also as soon as I started researching about flooding, I started to realise that 2022 was one of the worst years, in fact, I think on record for many places for flooding, climate heating related flooding. And the statistics and all the news were just appalling. You know, kind of we'd all heard on and seen what had happened in India and also in Nigeria, and then other places in Europe and all over the world. So I started to compile these kind of statistics really about what had happened in 2022. And I realised that, you know, every single month there was a record-breaking flood story. So I listed as many as I possibly could. I mean, there's obviously, I've missed loads, and the list could go on forever. And this idea of this kind of NASDAQ-style newsreel scrolling messaging that you would see at the bottom of the news came to mind. And then also the fact that there's also a sub-line in the news, which sometimes you get the headline news, which is always the worst stuff, and then underneath there's like a bit more of a story kind of line. And I thought, well, that's probably where Noah's Ark, you know, would go on the second line. So the first line, you know, is a red line. And then the second line is a blue line. But just thinking about, you know, those stories. So, yeah, the kind of two lines were the, you know, the kind of contemporary news, the kind of alert and the sort of urgent crisis in contemporary times. And then the second line was more about the sort of mythical and folkloric stories like Noah's Ark. And, you know, to my shame, I thought that Noah's Ark was really the only flood narrative. And then as soon as, you know, I began researching it, I realised obviously every culture had their own flood story, which was similar in some ways, and in some ways absolutely crazy, insane stories of these kind of cleansing the sins of the world, but then some sort of saviour comes, like a giant fish or a buffalo that sprouts gourds from its nostrils, and then the new clean and healthy human race is born out of these gourds. So really incredible stories. So together, and Anne helped me with this narrative because it was quite complicated and also, you know, really quite intense. But we eventually got to, you know, these two sort of narratives. And we turned up on the roof of Story Island a few weeks ago on a beautiful day, a bit like today actually. There was ice on the ground, and these three guys from Pioneer LED, who I'd never met before, kind of started putting together this LED sign, this bespoke sign, which, you know, was coded and everything, and looked, you know, there's me looking like terrified, thinking, is it going to work? Anyway, and here is Ollie, who was amazing as well, and we kind of had to shifty this thing into place down Story Island. I'm waiting for some really good images of this, because obviously when you take the images on a mobile phone, it just doesn't work. And my camera, it didn't work either. So these are the only images I've got at the moment. So I'm hoping we're going to get some good ones. Anne's told me that there are some coming. But yeah, I'm going to sort of leave it there. I'm literally, I think, just about on time, but it was a really great day, you know, installing this, because obviously you've done loads of research and work, and then you never really know until the last minute whether it's going to work or not. Everything has been in your head, and little drawings on, you know, envelopes and things like that, and more complicated drawings. And then you come to install it, and it was, you know, a bit nerve-wracking, to say the least, watching them just lower this LED sign, which looked quite fragile, into place. But I'm really pleased with how it looks, and I hope that you all have seen and enjoyed it. It's interesting watching people go by, you know, and kind of picking up, just as you would with a newsreel, just certain bits of it, and then, you know, them sort of talking to each other about it. So yeah, thank you, Meadow Arts, for yeah, and it's a great show as well, Watermark. So it's been really fantastic to be part of this show with some really amazing artists that, you know, I'm very, very fond of. So yeah, it's great. So thank you for listening, everybody.
Thanks so much.
So maybe if we just have 5 minutes just for you to collect your thoughts. If anyone needs to use the bathroom, it's up the stairs, just near the, you know, the entrance, and perhaps we can open up with some. Do you want to open up with some questions?
Yeah, sure, we'll do that.
Yeah,
Just
so-
see what the questions
So
are.
we'll be taking questions from the floor and also questions from online audiences. So.
No, thank you so much, Hilary, for that. I think it was really interesting for you to, as you say, show us how you approach these bigger works, and I think it's, you know, showing that it doesn't come out of the blue is really interesting. But what you're the kind of one thing that I'm always really interested in is what you talk about. You don't call it site specificity, do you? You call it site risk.
I think I said site referential, didn't I? I mean, I don't even know if that's the thing, but it just seems like site-specific is thrown around quite a lot.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that some works that are saying they're site-specific are. So
Yeah.
I think I was sort of maybe hedging my bets a bit there. I think that's on my website. But yeah, I think what I mean when I say site-specific is a piece of work that references the actual space it's in or the site that it's in some way.
Yeah.
So.
I think it's always a really, I mean, I tend to use context responsive, but I think it's just such an interesting debate, and I really like your expression for it, site referential, which is, but I'm always very interested in the idea of reciting context responsive site specific work, and I think the No Borders really does that fantastically, and you've shown us how these different contexts, you know, you did it in a very, very specific space. It was the English-Scottish border, it was, but then, you know, to these American people it meant something completely different. At the custard factory it means something different again. And I don't know, but I think sometimes, and you know, you work with found objects as well. And I know you did a series that you showed me of really interesting found paintings that you then you know, you buy them at flea markets or whatever, and then you kind of give them a new direction with text. And I think it's such an interesting area that it's almost like there's an alchemy in some artworks that can do that. I don't know, it's just...
Yeah, it's funny, I mean, particularly with No Borders, I think, you know, you can be very sort of hit a moment, I think. Actually, I was thinking about your work today, Dan, with the, because I heard someone talking about the doorways in the earthquake, you know, that's happened, this terrible earthquake in Syria and Turkey. And they were saying they'd woken up and they immediately knew what was happening and they ran into the doorway in their building. And, you know, I was just thinking, that's so interesting that happened at this moment. People will be visiting this show and seeing that thing. And also this piece of work as well, the Australian flooding that's happening, which has been incredible. But it's, with No Borders, it was particularly interesting, I think, because I really did think that was going into a massive box somewhere. and wondering, you know, how can I mean, obviously, I really want the work to be seen again and again. I hate the idea of having a piece of work made and then it just going into storage. But, you know, No Borders, it just hit this moment where boundaries and borders and conflict became something in the daily narrative in the news, and also to do with personal boundaries as well, like sort of Me Too generation and non-binary discussions and all of this kind of thing. And this came out really on social media and to people that I'd spoken to. So I think it can work both ways. You know, you could hit a really terrible thing and it might be like, well, I don't know, it's a really strange thing that happens to your work, because when it's in the world, you know, you're giving it to the world, so it's what comes back is interesting as well.
Yes, it's absolutely that. It's kind of becomes a vehicle for other things, and it has its own. And who knows where this piece will go? I mean, we had all sorts of different ideas about where the water was going to go up to, and it is, you know, specific, but who knows?
I mean, I think with this piece, initially we talked, didn't we, about having it so that we could have it submerged or literally sitting on the line where the water would come up to, which, you know, but it was too much of a risk, really. And then also just seeing it from far away was a good thing, or seeing it at a certain level. So there were lots of discussions had about that. But it would be great to see it in another context as well. And, the LED scrolling message can be changed. So
Yes.
that's another aspect to it. I mean, or it could be added to. So it could be what happens in 2023. It might be a heat wave, or, we don't know. So it can be added to. So I think where this goes, I hope it goes somewhere else, because I really don't want it in my studio in Manchester. But, I'm sure we'll find somewhere for it. But even as a standalone, without a Story Island type setting, I think it's an interesting kind of thing.
It's an object.
I'm still getting used to it, to be honest. I mean, it's funny when you make, when you make something, it takes a while for you to absorb it really afterwards.
No, I think it's there's the element that the text comes back into your work after No Borders, and there's, I just really loved your talk tonight about how, the way you built it up for us. That was really great. Should we see if there's questions?
Have any questions from the floor? Always this. Yay, 2, fantastic. First one at the back, great.
Hi.
Thank you very much. I think you mentioned that you did your MA in Manchester, is that right? Where did you do your BA, please? And was it sculpture or?
I did it in Manchester as well.
Right.
Yeah, so I've got 2 children, so the opportunity to kind of abandon them didn't really come about. So so I did my BA, and then a few years later I did the MA in Manchester. Just fine arts. It wasn't really, it was just fine art. And then what did happen though, which was amazing after I did, and I'd really recommend anyone finishing any course would apply to, loads of stuff, because when you finish your degree or whatever, it's a really hard time afterwards. And I was really lucky after my MA that I got on this residency with Goldsmiths, and I went to Hungary for 6 weeks. It was a taught residency, and by the MA tutors on the Goldsmiths course at the time, and it was really fantastic. And it just kind of ended that, it sort of cushioned the end of the MA, because when I was on my BA as well, I was on the BA, everyone had come up to Manchester because it was like, clubbing city, and they'd all come to Manchester to go clubbing really, and that was great. But after they finished their degrees, they all went back to London, and so there was very few of my peer group left in Manchester at that time, so it was quite a lonely experience. But the MA, doing that 6-week residency was fantastic, and I met loads of artists from all over the world. And then they came back and showed in apartments to Manchester, or they sent work. And I'm still in touch with many of those artists now. And also the other thing was that when I did the BA, all the London artists, it meant at least I had somewhere to stay, when I went to London. So, I think what I'm saying in a roundabout way is it's a really good thing to keep in touch with the people that you're studying with, or your network of artists in your hometown or your region, because those are the people that are going to be very useful and help you with your practice as well, and the people to talk to and bounce things off. So,
Great. Please.
Hi, I just wanted to ask you about text in your work, because obviously since Borders it's become, it seems very important. And whether you think of it as, because you were talking about found objects and found paintings, do you see it as sort of found text, found words that find their way into your work, or?
Yeah, it's kind of funny, really. Yeah. It's I've never seen myself as a text. I mean, I don't know what the next piece of work I'll make will be. So, and yeah, I guess this text in this is definitely borrowed, you know, it's not, and in No Borders, they're not my own words, really, you know. Well, they're definitely not with the No Borders, but with this piece, obviously, I've edited them. But, and there's quite a few spelling mistakes I've noticed in that, even though we checked it. But yeah, I guess that's a really good question. I think it is sort of has that found element to it. Yeah, and I don't know how it's happened, really. It's like, you know, once you have the idea, it's very hard to explain how you end up with the final product, if you like, or the final artwork. It sort of goes in, you know, I mean, I think we did talk about having upright sort of text, not text, but watermarks, you know, in a kind of LED way that would have gone up in some sort of way, but, you know, that wasn't going to be possible in this context in underwater.
There's a sense of urgency to it, isn't there? It kind of goes like news.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting.
Yeah. I can't remember if I said, but, you know, the red, it's all those things that, you know, people don't really, they perhaps think it's chance, but, you know, it's definitely a decision to have the top line in red, like a kind of urgent sort of alarmist text.
Great.
But also, just to finish on it, could you tell us just a little, to finish on that question, a little bit about these paintings you've done?
Oh, yeah,
just
so,
to answer that question.
Yeah, so these were, I showed them to Anne when we were talking about this, and it's an ongoing series that I've been making in my studio in Manchester. So I suppose it just is that thing about scale, and also the fact that I do like to have small work as well as big work like this, and, you know, maybe sometimes that work comes together in an exhibition in a gallery or something. But this is found paintings from eBay or charity shops that are a bit like the postcards sort of initially, and they're mainly landscapes, and most of the paintings are of a particular sort, and they usually sell for under £10, you know, so they're like £1.99 or £3 or something. And they are, I don't want to say, I don't know, they're kind of not the sort of paintings I would want on my wall anyway. But I've written on top of them with sort of like a conversation with the environment. So it might be like a massive sort of mountain and a lake or something, and a melting snow cap. And then I've just written on top, I'm sorry. So it's like this sort of conversation with the landscape and this sort of anthropocenic kind of situation, I suppose, where I'm apologising to the world about what we've done to it or something. I don't really know what they are. They're not very funny. I don't know why I'm laughing.
No, but it's the incursion of text in a visual that you've placed
I guess,
there. So that's why I was.
Yeah, again, I hadn't really thought about that.
It's an interesting. In that sense.
Great.
Sorry.
Hi, Hilary.
Hi, Dan.
Really enjoyed your talk. It's
Thank you.
to follow.
Thank you.
I've got a question about audiences and how they could be seen to kind of activate your work, and how you think about them, and how you think about maybe in those initial ideation stages versus the production or even post-production thinking, and how they kind of activate certain ideas around absence or presence. Even that going back to that kind of early work, the idea of the lost glove, but then you replace one. Those ideas of somebody actually returning to the site to find their glove, and then they find two, or you know, somebody on their way to work caught in a sudden downpour, and then they find your lovingly placed repaired umbrella or whatever. Or the idea of the empty nest versus the very full one once the public then start to kind of fill it up. How do you kind of think around these issues of kind of the public interfacing with your work, and how your work is either kind of activated or not when people interact with it?
That's a really hard question. I don't know really. I mean, I watched people today as well, and at the opening when we came down the other week, reading, this piece, and it's just really interesting to see people's reactions and sort of what they make of it and what they take away from it. And I think we underestimate the public quite a lot. You know, it's obvious that the people I saw today understood, you know, they didn't know who I was. I was just sort of, you know, eavesdropping really. And, you know, it was obviously understood what it was about and the meaning behind it. And then it goes on into a further discussion, as you can hear people then walking away going, oh, you know, did you hear about that flood or this or, you know, that, or who's made it, or is it an exhibition? So, yeah, I think that's really interesting. And the No Borders thing was particularly interesting because it had this kind of life of its own that I had no control over at all, you know, in the sense that on social media it could have gone, there was 1 or 2 times when Yorkshire Sculpture Park stepped in and kind of edited some or deleted, you know, or hid some of the comments that were out there, which was sort of abusive or whatever. But yeah, I don't know what the answer is, if there is one indeed. But no, I just think it's very interesting, and maybe, you know, perhaps my work would have gone down another route in terms of like a socially engaged practice or something. But there is an element within that at the beginning of my work, particularly.
Great, thanks. Do we have any questions from the online floor? No? Okay, great. Do we have any?
Just in terms of working with Meadow, as the university worked with Meadow over the years, and I know I've had lots to do with them as well. There's always been this challenge when commissioned artists have been commissioned to make work for a space, and then it's been, as Anne said, recited, or, you know, it's always that challenge. You make work for a space, obviously you're self-referential, site-referential is the word you use. The phrase you use. With the borders, when it was actually cited, I saw it at the Sculpture Park as it happens. I was there when Hilary was on, I think.
Yeah, that was amazing.
Amazing time. And it was very different to when you'd actually made the work on the borders in Scotland.
Yeah.
So did you have a say in work cited on the Yorkshire Sculpture Park, or was it a particular space? Did they decide that?
They had selected the space. And they did ask me, you know, I don't know what would have happened if I said no, but, you know, I was like, yeah, great. But in, obviously, Mellestane House, you know, the whole idea came from the site. So, yes, that was a whole new experience, really, having someone take that, you know, away from you, maybe. I don't know. I don't mean that in a negative way, but it was really interesting, and then it was an enclosed site as well, so it did feel like it was very boundaried there, but the timing of it as well was interesting because, you know, the Brexit discussion had become much more heated, and so a lot of people actually thought the words were mine. And that it was, you know, the negative comments were like it was a political statement from the artist or whatever, and, you know, that had to be corrected or whatever. But yeah, it was interesting in the way that the interpretations are very different, and obviously the site on top of the custard factory, that's slightly more random in the sense that, you know, but it is in the sky to me. You know, that's sort of like perhaps the closest that Amelia Earhart's words were meant, that, you know, there were no borders as she was flying across, you know, the countries and everything. So, and it is sort of it's in Digbeth, so it's kind of on the edge of the city in a way. So it's looking out, well, it's looking into the city, but behind it is, you know, the rest of the country or something. So, yeah.
No, it must be amazing to make work that actually can speak in so many different ways to so many different audiences.
Yeah, it's been really interesting, really, really interesting. Still absorbing it all, really.
Great. So, yeah, please.
Did you have to have permission to use somebody else's work?
No. In fact, I've tried to find out when she said those words. I've done quite a lot of inquiring about that, and no one can tell me when she said it, but they are her words, you know. Yeah, no, I didn't have to have permission. I think perhaps if somebody was living, I don't know, would that make?
No,
I
it's
don't
50
know.
years.
I think as well, there's something I wanted to say which I did forget about during the talk. You know, there's a lot of risk factor when you make work like this, you know, and there's a lot of trust involved in the commissioner, the artist and the commissioner, and also the people fabricating the work, because, you know, this was very fast. And we didn't have time to go down and see Pioneer LED. You know, the first time we met them was when they turned up with the piece, and, you know, things like that. There's a lot of trust goes on with artists and commissioners, and sometimes you can mitigate that very well by doing, you know, but sometimes time doesn't allow that or whatever. So that's another interesting aspect, I think. And sometimes that trust isn't there from the beginning. So, you know, perhaps the project falls apart. So it's an interesting relationship, I think, with all of this kind of work and public realm stuff, how people want it, if they don't want it, or is it going to cause issues? You know, are people going to be annoyed about it? I mean, that occurred to me towards the end, really, if perhaps somebody would have a problem with the Story Island being used in this way, but I don't think it has, as far as I know.
Not yet.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, exactly. Brilliant.
Anybody else? Okay, great. Well, we're just about coming up to time.
Yeah.
So
Good.
that's great. Thank you very much, Hilary.
Thank you
so much,
everybody.
Hilary.
Thank you. Thank you.
Brilliant. That was so good.